So I'm going to hand over pretty quickly to Fiona because I always defer to serious professionals and curators, and also because this is very much a sort of two-part event, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit, Fiona's going to talk a little bit to Joanne to do with the specific exhibition. I may do a little bit of interjections of contextualization and elements, and we'll see how it flows. And then hopefully you can all ask questions to Joanne or pick up any points that we offer. I'm aware that you're standing and we're sitting down, which feels kind of embarrassing, but we're very old here, so we do need to sit down. And anybody who's, there are a few benches, so please do that. So we'll try to make it so enthralling that you don't notice the pain in your feet. Okay, so Fiona, would you like to start us off?
Well, thanks for the invite, Phil. Obviously, I'm delighted to be here with such a prestigious panel. And I guess I should sort of, I guess I should be honest in that I only recently discovered Joanne's work. I've been writing a book about the V&A's collection and about women in the collection and those that use photomontage and photo collage and a sort of history from 19th century to present day. And in doing that research and looking at where the gaps were, significant gaps in our collection, I came across this astonishing body of work that I hadn't experienced before. I should caveat, I'm not an art historian, so my knowledge is patchy. And I came across this incredible body of work and later learned that it had gone to the Whitney. And I got very jealous. And so I emailed Joanne and I said, Joanne, I've just discovered this work and it's fantastic. And can we hop on a call and can you tell me more? And I think we spent about an hour and a half on a Zoom. And Joanne just gave me, all this information about her fantastic practice and sent me this wonderful book. And I've just fallen in love with the practice from what we ended up acquiring, which hopefully you will see and we'll touch upon a little bit more later. But I think what Griselda and I wanted to sort of start to talk about was this very formal quality that your photography has. And obviously, as people with interest in feminist practice, which we all do, I feel like, Curator of Women in photography in a museum like the V&A, you sort of can't really help, but I feel a responsibility to address some of those things. But we also realise that for artists like Joanne, it's probably quite easy and a little bit reductive and quite lazy often to just go straight to the subject matter and avoid talking about how wonderful your photography is from a technical perspective. And I think that's probably where we should start, because I think the feminist angle and your interests as a woman artist will come later when we talk about individual pieces, and certainly when we come over and we see the works that we've acquired at the V&A. So that's where I think.
So say something about the technique.
Yeah, and perhaps where that came from, because you're obviously, you're a very accomplished printer, and you were making. We know you were making, your own prints, darkroom prints for a long time, and.
Yeah, the darkroom, I guess in a few more years there'll be some very mysterious thing that, because photographs just aren't made that way anymore. So I'm just looking for a way in, how to talk about it. I pretty quickly came to the idea of using not a 35 millimeter camera, partly because I cared so much about the interaction with the subjects. So when you're holding a camera up to your eyes, that's a problem. So the 2.25 camera that I have with the twin lens, I didn't have a Hasselblad because that's top of the line, but the 2.25 is a camera down here with two lenses, and you're looking through one and the camera is actually taking the picture through the other. So you see it on a ground glass and you see it as a square. It looks really marvelous because the ground glass is kind of especially attractive, and if you've seen it, you know what I mean. So that's the camera I used, and the negatives are pretty big. So the prints that you make from them don't when you expand them or enlarge them, they don't turn into a grainy look. So it gives a rather different look than more typically 35 millimeter photographs. So that's part of why the photographs look the way they do. And hours spent in the darkroom, that's that's the story behind it. Julia my daughter's here, being at school or being with somebody that could come and play with her or take her somewhere, so I would have time in the darkroom. The floor was cement, and it was really hard to be in there sometimes, especially on a sunny day and wondering what the heck you're doing down in the darkroom. But I was excited about what I could make there. So that's some of the technical aspect of it. A print as large as that one was especially difficult because you have to raise the enlarger really high, and so there aren't too many that that are that large. So it also somewhat dictated the sizes of the things that I would make.
How did you come to photography and specifically, making your own silver gelatin print? Where did that training come from?
Well, I went to Berkeley, or Cal, as they called it, so University of California in Berkeley, and there was no photography taught there. So I went to Oakland, which is a neighbor city of Berkeley, to the junior college there, which was more of a technical instruction and more for people who wanted a job. They even taught dry cleaning and things like that, but practical things, how to make a photograph was a practical instruction. And I used their darkroom, and I learned and they had large format cameras, like speed graphic, a professional, what a journalist at the time would make, the kind you would see in an old movie, I guess, with a flash on the side and stuff. So I used those. I used their darkroom. I used the local evening high school darkroom in the beginning. But pretty soon I made my own darkroom in a closet, in a basement, even when I had to carry the water in for the trays and mix the chemicals and so on. So most of where I've lived, and always where I've lived with Julia, there's been a darkroom. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
Can I just come in there? Because I think this question of two things you said really strike me. One is the question of not looking through the camera, but a lot of sort of women photographers that I've been studying, who use that things means that you have direct relationship, and I think that produces a particular kind of vision, because you are not. I mean, although you're framing it in relation to what you're seeing, it's kind of like closer to what we have now with digital. We can see what we photographed, etc. So you really are composing. It's not a snap. That you can compose every element of it. And I think that's why I said to Fiona, we should really, I think that's so stunning here is all the formal qualities. But then when you're talking about the technicalities of the darkroom, that people forget the chemistry of it, the technical. We go right back to Julia Margaret Cameron as one of these, that women got involved in this very, very chemical, messy, technical, long process. And when you see old movies where you have the red lights on and you can't come in and you can't mess it, and hanging up the photographs, I think we forget what is involved in this, because now it's these, and that obviously, maybe you could talk a bit about that one again, because I think people are asking how did the wings get there? But that's the thing we needed to once say. There's the very, very technically skilled, accomplished, acquired over a lifetime of making photographs is what produces these compositions and these very fine gradations of colour that are absolutely so spectacular when you sort of look at them. But that's a very interesting.
To talk about that one, if you read the list of titles and medium, that one is called cliché vert, which is a French word that actually means a negative, a photographic negative. But I was telling Griselda that I found out that the term cliché was a printer's term for setting up type. And if you had a phrase like once upon a time that was used all the time, you would keep them together. So that would be a cliche. And that's how it got to be that if you repeatedly said something, it would become a cliche and lose some of its potency because it was. But a photographic negative, instead of being a drawing, is something that came together all at once on one surface. So in that sense, it's a cliche. It's already set up to be printed through. So that's the origin of it. And cliche variant photography is a cameraless negative, is an image made without a camera. So this combines a negative I made of Julia on our back screen porch looking out with a cicada wing. And in Michigan, we have the longest periodic cicadas. Cicadas are an insect that make their young form is called a nymph that it arrives out of an egg that's in a tree, and then they climb down the tree and they go into the ground, and they stay there for a period of time, 3 years to 17 years. So we had 17-year cicada emergence not long after I moved to Michigan. And that's where I found cicada wings on the ground and dead cicadas. And so there's a cicada is about as big, it made the shadow. It's in the form of photogram on the side of the print. And the wings are the result of putting the wings up in the enlarger, using them like a negative. So in that sense, it's cliche there, handmade negative. So that's the story of how that was made. My idea about it is that it represents an emergence of a young person into, the next stage, or, on the verge or something.
It's also a collage.
Yeah, yes,
which
yes.
we'll obviously
Yes.
come on to, but
Right,
I
right.
wanted to just pick up on something that Griselda said, which is this idea about the type of camera you're
Yeah.
using, and about this idea about the gaze, because it's quite fashionable now, post-colonial era. Lots of artists of color using different formats of photography to to unpick these problematic histories. But it's interesting that in the 70s that you're using this, and maybe we can talk a little bit about these photographs behind me. But were you, and you talked about this in your interview with Charlotte, but you've talked about this idea about, being uncomfortable about the sort of exploitative nature of photography and feeling like, you're sort of taking something. And is that why this format of the camera is quite important for you? Did you feel like it helped you engage with communities and with people?
Definitely. So not being behind the camera, but being in direct conversation with people, it's much more comfortable. And there's that, and then there's the having in the end a larger negative. So both things were compelling. And these photographs, I was married to a sculptor and living in a semi-industrial area where there remained houses that were, it was zoned industrial, and they were even not allowed to get permits to fix up the houses. The people were also, as you probably can sense, not well-to-do. So these are my neighbors, and I eventually joined organizations in the neighborhood to help. We had rats and other problems that were part of being in a neighborhood that was founded or developed before the rest of the city and didn't come under the ordinances that required garbage pickup. So because we didn't have curbs and gutters, we didn't have street lights, we just a very low quality of maintenance in terms of what the city was providing. So neighbors got together to be a neighborhood organization to put pressure on the city, and that's how I being part of that, met my neighbors and got to know them and began photographing weddings and so one of these is a wedding. This is the mother and the sister of a bride with a wedding dress in the background. So So got to be very good friends. In fact, one of them woke Julia and me up at 3 a.m, just saying hello. We hadn't talked a long time, calling me from not knowing that I was in London and calling me from California. It was 3 a.m, but it was kind of appropriate because this photograph of her family is, yeah. And some members of the family, I had a show at Berkeley at the University Museum, and they came from Oakland. So we're still in touch, even though these pictures are like 50 years old.
Because it's crucial also picture, I mean, that you're a very, very young person at the point at which you're doing this, and you are making your way by being a photographer.
Yes.
At a point where, in sort of, I suppose, institutional terms, we have a long history of women in photography from the very beginning because it was such an unofficial art form.
Yeah, that's true.
And then it becomes to be, associated with, reporters, and, then we get canonized with a great sort of history of wonderful men who have been made wonderful photographs, etc. But to be a very, in your early 20s, learning this at this college, and then doing this and producing photographs of this, quality that just sort of holds right now. Either I've been waxing very much about the formalist side of it, etc. But I think now you brought out the sense, this very deep sense of connection with the people that you are photographing, but how that registers then this other moment or these other places in American society that are either photographed, like the Dust Bowl, and you photograph poor people, you photograph black people, or else we get into who photographs women, usually for other kind of purposes. But you're producing a particular kind of gaze that we then take up that position. And that's what I think it'd be fun to kind of just draw out a little bit, because it's not just like a woman's gaze, etc. But you find things that photography makes us see exist that we wouldn't we wouldn't notice. The early morning light coming through a kind of a modern building with, the two sets of curtains, what kind of taps, how we leave our washing. I never leave my drying up. I hate seeing drying up the next morning. So this is I immediately think.
Don't do that, yes.
What some people do. Why not? Because there's the obvious thing to. But there's so many details of it. Or again, the one next to it about the question of a kind of how you're seeing a certain a space, a room, but then with the Venetian blinds, you see both the lights and then the world beyond it, and then what is an interior? You can say these are photographs of interiors, or or what is a shelf, and then we move on from those objects to the kitchen. I think this sense of you're making us pay attention. I think everybody is going to go back to their kitchens and look around and say, "Oh, I'm in an industrial workspace." Whereas conventionally, the notion of the kitchen is a woman's place is in the home, in the bedroom, in the kitchen. But actually, you're dealing with the industrialization of domestic labor. Now, that's nice things, but who made those things? So where's the invisible labor of the manufacturing and all those things? So I think you make us see things without us knowing that we're being made to see them. But once you start saying, what am I seeing? It's a very acute vision.
And this is a really important series, right? Because it's playing on so many of these sort of very subtle threads in art history. It reminds me of this idea about, you spoke earlier about Julia Margaret Cameron and the 19th century women who are working in these, very domestic spaces, and it's, sort of all about kind of necessity. But it's interesting. I wonder if you could talk a bit about this series and where it came from, the idea of, how did it come about? This is quite an interesting history of how you came to make this work. And then maybe you could talk a little bit about the exhibition that it was in. In MoMA, yeah, with Clement.
Okay. Chauncey here is another photographer, and he worked for Standard Oil. And he got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to do a project he named The Impact of Technology on American Life. And he thought a woman should join the group. So Bill Owens, who did a book called Suburbia, and I and Chauncey, who was photographing the put upon employees of Standard Oil, in Chauncey's opinion. That was his perspective of the oppression of industrial capitalism, yes. So he asked me, and Julia was 2, and I didn't see how I could really be responsible for a documentary project which had a large scope. So I chose my neighborhood and the people on my block, and I included also some photographs. The kitchen window is actually Julia's grandmother living in San Leandro, her bedroom with the plastic covers over the blankets. This photograph is made across the street, in a house across the street from where I lived in West Oakland. So it brings together a number of things that sort of went through my work at different times. What else should I say? So I had the idea and a responsibility to photograph women's spaces, or from a women's perspective, both of those things that I took on, and that's the underpinnings, I think, of this, with a thought toward what's technology, and so that even stoves and refrigerators and mixmasters and microwaves are technology, and not just in industrial spaces such as what Chauncey was photographing. And so that became the concentration and something that I thought that I could manage. And that's the origin of this project.
Yeah. It's very ahead of its time, really. And then it came to be shown at MoMA.
Yes. Well, that actually, this is a very different story, but as an older person with a lot of my own work still in my own possession, I began to think, what's going to happen to this? And Julia's going to have the responsibility to take care of distributing this everywhere. So I started out offering my work to some collections that I care about. And MoMA was the museum that my parents had taken me to, that I saw Guernica when it first came to the MoMA. And eventually, I grew up in Los Angeles, but eventually my parents lived in Connecticut, and we would go whenever I was with them. We would go into New York, and we always went to MoMA. So MoMA was really important to me, seemed like a very big deal. And so at a point I offered some work to them, and they accepted 62 photographs of mine. So that's the story, really, that giving the work away was part of the ticket, I think. But by that time, I mean, I wasn't the first museum to acquire my work. San Francisco Museum and LA County Museum and some other major museum already owned my work, so I had a little credibility when I offered the work.
And what was the context that Clement showed it in? Because that's quite interesting.
It was called Interiors. Yeah. So they drew work from different parts of their collection about home, they're all photographs in that show that of interior spaces. Do you remember some of the other artists that were in that? Yeah, I think there were 8. Yeah. And you would find it under, in MoMA, maybe 2018 or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so shall we kind of move a little bit on to the sense, so that the first thing I think everybody needs to do is to look and see and recognize what do those kinds of questions and see. And then, of course, it's that you put into the world things that provoke us once we see what we're seeing, to think on kind of, not just kind of more symbolic things, but in the sense of what is this all about and things. So now that we've really asked you to do that, we can explore some of the issues, which is, why does it matter that Joanne's work comes into the world more or is known more? So if you said you came across it through collage, There are two things we should say, that Joanne's work is one of the first works by a woman that was ever put into Janssen's History of Art. Now, this gallery knows about Janssen's History of Art. If any of you have come to this gallery before, because Coral Woodbury has been painting portraits of women artists over all its 567 pages or 267 pages, because really, I'm going to play heavy-duty feminist art historian. It is one of the great crimes of the 20th century that it was only in 1950 that anybody dared write a history of art that had no women in it. 1950, right? Up until that point, every dictionary of art you consulted, there are huge books written in Germany and France, all the way through the 19th century in English as well, about women as part of the history of art. If any of you are dealers, you go to the auction catalogues. There are so many hundreds of paintings by Sylvanus Anguissola in the catalogues around 1900, because the minute they saw an Italian noblewoman, they thought, oh, Anguissola, because they knew the name, right? 1900, they knew her well enough to attribute all these works to her. So it's the 20th century, the Gombrichs and the Janssens, who perverted the minds of millions of people. Each of those books have sold over 6 million copies. They are in 30 languages, right? So this means that whole histories have disappeared, so we then find ourselves having to recover it. And then you say, we discovered these women artists. And you think, oh, poor Joanne, you know, she's now, finally, we've been so nice, etc. But you think of what we've missed by not knowing that there are this many artists in the world who gave their specific vision to the world and drew our attention to things by making art. So there's my very heavy spiel, etc. But Joanne was actually the first woman with that painting, that collage. Romanticism is ultimately fatal. That was included when they first included photography in a history of art in Janssen in the 1980s. But she was also, if any have been around in the 70s, like Sylvia, who's wonderful, Sylvia Zierenek, who's one of the great feminist performance artists of our generation, we could have read about Joanne in Lucy Lippard's first collection of writings about women artists, because she was there in the 70s, right? Anybody who had read those essays, some of us did, and things. So this is a long history, and this brings me to the sense that we're all part of this moment when women revolted and said, enough. We have got to have our own histories. We've got to have a knowledge of this, not because they are special and different, but because they are just there. Like there's an awful lot of us about, right? Actually, slightly more than that, a lot of the guys who got written up, etc. So what happens when you have some, not just women artists, but artists one by one, producing their unique perspectives on things that extend and enrich this world with calling our attention to various aspects. But at the same time, there was a women's movement, there was a consciousness, there was a collective feeling that gave us the resources for paying attention to certain kinds of things. And I think that's an important context. It's not feminist because here's my, over my heart, and there's a sort of ideology written all over it, but it's because there was this moment where a great thing. So you were part of that, and right there at the very beginning, and recognized from the beginning. So maybe we could just talk about your sense of being part of this questioning of what was given and looking in a different way.
I had a lot to learn. I really wasn't. There were I had not thought about feminism or everything that had been left out, but the feminist movement in the 60s, 70s was happening maybe a little bit in advance of what was happening on the East Coast. In the West, because of Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro in Los Angeles. So I kind of got found by them. Miriam Shapiro came to San Francisco Art Institute and saw my work, and she was so excited, especially about the work that you have. So she said, oh, you have to come to Cal Arts, and you have to, and so I went there, but I wasn't ready to move back to LA where I was born. That would felt like taking a step backwards. So I stayed in the Bay Area, but I felt very invited in, embraced, and I didn't quite get it either. Miriam gave a party for me in New York, and I brought the gallery director and she said, "Joanne, this party is just for women." And I'm like, I made a big mistake. so I really was a little slow to pick up on, the force of being women joined together. But the women's movement was very important for what it did for me, more than what I did or understood about it, at least initially. But then in the university, it was an opportunity for me to be insisting on hiring women and making courses that spoke to the problems of including women. And I taught a history of photography class, and one student wrote a critique. Showing a few works by women was fine, but more than 20 was way too much. That's what this student thought. But I was laying it on a bit heavy, they thought. But anyway, I was making sure that women's work got shown.
And one final thing, obviously, which I will prepare us for going down to the V&A to see the journal, which is that there are things that women observe in different ways, and straight women observe from queer women and trans women and all the rest of it. So we have these multiple perspectives in the world that we need to have registered and valued for the ways of seeing and being in the world that art can sensitize us to in certain ways. But also there are fundamental events, life and death, love and pain, right? And I think that's a very important part of your work, which is that you've dared to take us into ways which are not autobiographical, but lend the lived experience. And I think this is also very important because people kind of tend to see that women's work is just like confessional. But actually, love, death, sex, desire, disappointment, loneliness, all of these things are the very powerful things we need to share and art can take us to. So maybe you can talk a little bit about romanticism is ultimately fatal, and the sense because you wanted a child, you had a child, the relationship did not survive that and sustain you in that. You have this wonderful, beautiful daughter, Julia, who has been your willing and unwilling and unquestioned model in many kinds of things. But that was produced a beautiful series of works about the girl, about a daughter, about a child, a female child in the world. And some of your work is very much about what it was for someone like Julia to grow up under Ronald Reagan, under, nuclear threat. We forget, so there was the wonderful women's movement. But I mean, I carried paracetamol in great quantities in my handbag for many years because in Yorkshire, I lived between the American sort of snooping station up on the hills, which is on one part of us, and major installations. So we knew that if the bomb dropped, it would drop just there, right? And so raising children in the 60s, and you forget Greenham Common, you forget the fact that cruise missiles and all of that agitation and the long history of anti-nuclear things. So just to bring back that as an important thing, that a lot of your work is about that feeling that the fragility of any children coming into the world at that point was under the things. And now I'm sure we feel that people coming into the world under Trump and these people is equally.
It's very much like that, yeah. The Reagan era, the collage I made, Julia and the Window of Vulnerability, isn't here, but it's in Gardner's Art Through the Ages. It's the opening page of the chapter on the modern world, I think. And that's a great thing for me to, it has the word mom stenciled on it, and I would say that it was a Trojan horse that carried the word mom into the arena of history of art. So that was a very wonderful thing for me. Yes, making collages was a way to suggest, as my photographs themselves became more and more about Julia and my sister's children and family, to suggest that I knew something about the rest of the world or was concerned about the rest of the world. So the layering on to my photographs or finding a way to put the collage behind the photographs, that's all or make a something that created a story. That photographs sort of take something away from its context, and the collages are a way to put a context back and to put some of the newspaper and the headlines of the day into the surface, or somewhere into the space of the photograph.
And I think that's why when we see the journal of the myth carrier, we will begin to see this other aspect, which I think also we've got two works in the show here. You've got two works called the Newspaper Diaries, which again bring together the sense of everyday living, that everybody gets up every day and thinks about the day after day aspects of living, which are the very substance of our biographies, etc. But actually they're retained for us in my images or memories or certain kinds of things. So you snip the newspapers, which will soon be a wonderfully archaeological thing, which you'll have to explain to people that we had
so
paper.
Worried that there won't be any.
Etc. But what I really love about newspaper diaries is the sense that by being an artist of all these, that you've acquired both a whole history of art in your head, a whole history of photography in your head, but also keep encountering the fact that this kind of cultural imaginary, it penetrates to things, so that when a photographer takes a photograph, there's some kind of memory that makes that make a memorable photograph, and then you find a kind of echo in your great archive of art history and photographic history, and they become funny at times and ironic, but sometimes terribly tragic as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that collage project?
About the journal itself, or about the newspaper diary, pieces. I feel so sorry for everybody standing, that you want to wiggle around or something. It must be awful. The newspaper diary, well, the same idea of trying to suggest that my everyday isn't just what I can take in front of the camera. I mean, it's simply not. I'm not out in the world, and the world is coming into my space every day. And in a funny way, and I know Fiona will relate to that, we are both twins. And the work is very twinny in a sense that there's always a doubling. There's two pages, and there's the matching, the sort of resonant images that are paired. So I think that may be another. My mother is a Freudian psychoanalyst, so I can't avoid thinking about what she would say, or what the symbolism in a way, or the more abstract aspect of the coming together of the printed page and the newspaper image. But it is a way. I started the newspaper diary actually as a way. I didn't think of it as a diary so much as an exercise in learning to use a digital camera and printing. And I'm printing these and learning to make inkjet prints that I could, that were adequate to my standards. So it was a way to move into the modern possibilities and to move my work forward. And also I wasn't that much able or inclined to go out in the world and take pictures. So it satisfied those various needs that I had to continue to make images using more available materials and mechanisms, and to learn a new technique or possibility to print. So I can print 13 by 19. If they're going to be larger, I have somebody else print them, but I make one that they can follow as how it should look. So that enough, do you think?
I mean, what I love about them is that it sort of reminds me about this idea about, how Martha Rosler always is referring to this idea that, the war is, and political situations are entering the home.
Yes,
and that is very much what your similar work is doing. It's making a comment on how these everyday situations enter, and as were a lot of the Russian constructivists, they were equally interested in using collage in this way to critique or, create political propaganda that, that spoke to this idea about the political situation coming into what is essentially a domestic space and therefore
And I
can be
love
linked
the
to
Russian
women's
constructivists and also the medieval art and the storytelling possibilities within bringing together these disparate pieces onto one surface or construction. Yeah.
I mean, that's why collage is so wonderful, because it has this infinite, construction, reconstruction, dismantle it, it's perfect, and it's perfect for this, this idea that things are inherently political, but they're also,
So when you see the Miscarriage Journal, I started, in a sense, out of envy of the Bay Area artists that, like William Wiley, whose pieces got hung up with grommets, instead of frames, and the informality and photography and having to go into the darkroom and thinking that I'm going to be having a baby and how am I going to make art when I don't have enough time? I'm going to start doing something more immediate. And I got this sketchbook and I started making collage. And then I had and it was about being pregnant, about being happy. And then I had a miscarriage. So when you see the Miscarriage Journal, you can see that it was partly a solution to a problem, like how to be more spontaneous with materials and a way to work, but also how to relate to the moment of being pregnant and the future of being a mom and continue figuring out a way to continue to make art. So that's what you'll be seeing.
Should we, on that thing, because of we're going to go and see it, and it's one of the, we will obviously say this, I mean, there's very little in the world that actually registers this form of loss. I don't like calling, because I think the concept of pregnancy loss or mourning, because whenever it happens to anybody, it's a deeper mourning, but it's a mourning for exactly a future you imagined, which is, I think, a very important aspect. So finding these elements of our lives that need a form for us to be able to share and things, I think. So we'll look at it rather than think of it as a kind of in other terms. But perhaps we should just let people ask us some questions before we go on and find out if this is ring bells with people and things.
It was a wonderful talk. Thank you, all three of you. You sound really, really gentle, and yet there's an extraordinary determination. I like the sink. I'm with the sink the whole time. Did you have influences? Are there any particular writers or architects or textile designers or poets who inspired you in any way or much?
Well, Dorothea Lange lived in Berkeley and was the Farm Securities Administration photographs were shown when I was a kid. The book, The Family of Man, which was this post-World War II effort to create a we're all one family idea, leaving out all aspects of race and gender. And I mean, not that they weren't pictured, but it was as though those could be all smoothed over and that this was one big family. But the photographs in that really influenced me and made me love photography. And my grandmother knew Edward Weston, so we even had Edward Weston photographs in the house. I think my education really came. My parents were interested in art. I even knew one woman artist by name. I knew Keta Kolvitz because our pediatrician had some of her work on the wall. So because I was part of Los Angeles' exile. My father was born in Mannheim and left Germany because of the Nazis. My mother was interested in socialism and politically involved. My parents were supported the Progressive Party and so there was a political arena that many of our friends were blacklisted communists or accused of being communists and left the country and went to Mexico. So that was some of the political environment that made me wish, with all the domestic involvement of my own photographs, that it was so close at hand, that it have a larger dimension and have some kind of political meaning, if I could possibly find how to do that. Thank you for the question.
I mean, we should say that you're born in Hollywood.
Yes.
And made your debut. Or
Yes,
you-
in 6 months of age, I was in a movie with Marlene Dietrich as a result of being a twin, because they need babies that they can have on screen interchangeably and use for more hours. So my mother shared Fred Astaire's dressing room with the babies in this movie, but Marlene fell and broke her famous leg carrying one of us. And my mother, as a psychologist, was very distressed at the impact on us of the environment in the film. So we were withdrawn. And so I was in the movies and not in the movies. There are probably some frames in the movie. The lady is willing, that is me as a baby, but I don't really know which ones. But that was a very Hollywood start to our life. Yeah.
But also the kind of refugee community.
Yes, the Los Angeles. My father was not alone as a member of the community of exiles from Europe who came to Los Angeles and created a artistic community. I read a book called Exiles in Paradise, which is about that era and those. And some of the accumulated richness of Southern California in terms of even Thomas Mann lived there. So
Adorno lived in Brentwood, which always fascinates me.
and my father was involved with classical music and chamber music, so we knew Arthur Schnabel and all kinds of composers and musicians.
The whole world obviously was Any other questions?
Just a quick, what type of camera were you using during this period?
I had a 2 1/4 camera, a Mamiya Flex. It's a 2 1/4 camera. It actually has interchangeable lenses, so you could have wide angle or telephoto or standard angle of vision. I hardly ever use the other ones beyond the standard, but it seemed like a good solution for me. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.